Going to be a tough one to make, this one, guys. A tough one. Okay then, Patriots, we're going to have to talk about the death of young Henry Nowak, who was killed in a needless attack by a Sikh carrying a ceremonial dagger. I don't want to digress too much from the story, but it's a strange world we live in, isn't it? Where young Sikh men are allowed to carry weapons, supposedly to defend themselves, when our women, they're not even allowed to carry even pepper spray to defend themselves against the potential attackers. Or like Freedom Dad, who was arrested for handling an Hello Kitty key ring because it was a possible weapon. Yeah, strange world. For the rest of the men in our country, it's a crime to carry knives. It's supposed to be a 4-year prison sentence if caught carrying one. Of course, unless you're a Sikh, you're exempt from the laws of our land. They're above the law. Personally, I think all native British people should have the right to defend themselves. Perhaps they should have the right to carry, air quotes, ceremonial shotguns to defend themselves against the new British colonisers who arrive in here daily, both legally and illegally. YouTube, that's a joke, okay? A joke, not a real suggestion. I have to say that, otherwise YouTube will crush the video. They probably will at any rate. It's talking about the death of a white man. Pause, Paul, gather your thoughts. Last night, within minutes of the body cam footage from the police being released, I was put in a dilemma. I didn't know whether to show the video immediately over on a live stream we had to go in or not. I knew it was disturbing and distressing. I haven't watched it. I've seen too much death. I didn't want to upset myself. I thought, but is it my duty to show that video to the channel members and channel subscribers? Got a lot of ladies. They tough cookies. They patriotic ladies. I thought, do I really want to upset them? Do I want to upset the men? Because it is disturbing and upsetting by everything I've been told. Like I said, I haven't seen it. I've got no intentions of watching it. So again, this morning I was trying to decide whether to show the video. And then over in the live feed, one of the commenters, I'm sorry, I forget the person's name, turned around and said, "No, Green Arrow, you shouldn't show it." Why? Well, it might prompt someone to make a comment in anger that could get them jailed. It could get the channel taken down. And I thought, yeah, I could understand why if I was to show that video, someone might do a Lucy Connolly and make an hasty comment that would be grabbed court that could be used to convict them in the same way that Lucy Connolly was convicted. So that was an excellent comment, and I think I'm taking that advice, yeah, for the protection of, if you like, people who get outraged by what is obviously a very upsetting footage, and they would be really right to get upset. But I'm going to do something else instead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read to you the final sentencing remarks made by the judge at the sentencing of Henry's killer, and I guarantee you it will outrage you possibly as much as the actual video of the body cam footage. So it's going to be long. It's 10 pages. I'm going to have to read it out. Not looking forward to doing that. But some of you I know like to listen to the videos whilst you're doing other stuff, and some of you have with eyesight problems watching the videos on, say, mobile phones. So I'll read it to you in full. I'll pause now and again to make comments. Why is it important for me to get this information to you? It's because in various parts of the remarks made by the judge, he says things that perhaps most of you didn't know about. He certainly said things I wasn't aware of. Anyhow, don't put it off, Jay. Make a start. Pause, Paul. Okay, here we go. For those of you who want to read it, you can just quickly scroll through the video, but I have to read it. Judiciary of England and Wales is Honour Judge William Mousley K.C, King's Counsellor, Honorary Recorder of Southampton and Resident Judge. The King versus VICKRUM SINGH DIGWA. Sentence and Remarks, 1st of June 2026. 1. Stand up please Henry Nowak, aged 18. Died on 3rd of December 2025. He was a much-loved, kind, hard-working and ambitious young man, devoted to his family and with a bright future. He was a first-year student at Southampton University, the first in his family to go to university. He was careful and principled, full of humour, warmth and promise. He was 18, I'm 77. 60 years, I've lived longer than that young man. 60 years. We never know what he could have grown up to be, what his children might have grown up to be. Everything we know about him leads me to believe that he was an asset to our country. 2. You, VICKRUM DIGWA, murdered him. By doing so, you robbed him of all those he loved, all the things he cared about and liked to do. He would have been expected to live a long, hopefully happy and fulfilling life. You have brought misery and a lifetime of loss upon his family and great sadness to everyone who knew him. You are 23. In December 2025, you were 22 and had no previous convictions. You may sit down for now. Mark Nowak, Henry's father, has described the devastating and lifelong impact of Henry's death on him and the whole family. He speaks of the horror of losing his son in such violent circumstances, the trauma of identifying his body, and the lasting torment of imagining Henry's final moments. He describes overwhelming grief, guilt, helplessness, and the pain of seeing Henry's mother, siblings, and wider family broken by the loss. Mr. Nowak says that the family has effectively been given a life sentence with the pain affecting every aspect of their lives and every significantly family occasion, and that nothing will ever fill the permanent void left by Henry's death. 5. Lucy Ross, Henry's mother, has described the profound and enduring impact of his death upon the whole family. She recalls the devastating moment she was told of his death and the anguish of having to tell Henry's elderly grandparents. Heartbreaking. She describes the continuing grief suffered by the family, including Henry's sister, Olivia, who has lost not only her brother but her best friend, and says that the profound and lasting effect of this loss is something they will carry the rest of their lives. 6. Olivia Nowak, the sister of Henry, describes a relationship of exceptional closeness in which her brother was not only a sibling but her closest companion and a central part of her daily life. His death has, in her words, caused her world to fall apart. She recounts the profound shock and trauma of being informed of her brother's death and the continuing anguish associated with identifying him, attending his funeral, and confronting the many firsts without him, his birthday, Christmas, and other significant family occasions. The impact upon her own life has been profound and enduring. Her home, once a place of comfort, is now a constant reminder of his absence. She describes the effect on her ability to work due to persistent grief and intrusive thoughts about the circumstances of his death. She also carries an additional emotional burden as the eldest sibling, striving to support her younger brothers and sisters through their grief while recognizing that she is powerless to remove their pain. This compounds her own suffering. The loss, she makes clear, is lifelong. Her life has been permanently changed by the death of her brother, and the emotional consequences remain acute and far-reaching. Anyone who has a loved one who's in pain, there is nothing worse than the sense of helplessness that you have, that you can't help someone you love who's in pain. I've been there, I'm sure most of you have. It's terrible, knowing that someone is suffering and you can do nothing to alleviate it. 7. David Stevenson, stepfather, describes the devastating impact of Henry's death upon him and the wider family. He explains that Henry was his much-loved stepson with whom he had a close and an affectionate relationship, and speaks of the shock of learning that Henry had been murdered and the lasting grief, sadness and anger that have followed. He also explains that the consequences have affected every aspect of his own life, including the loss of his employment, and says that the family will carry this pain permanently. It will. Katie Woodcock's stepmother describes the devastating and far-reaching of the impact of Henry's death upon her husband and the younger children in the family. She recounts the trauma of being told by police in the early hours that Henry had been stabbed and killed, and the lasting effect of that night upon her. She explains that the loss has caused profound emotional harm to Henry's younger siblings, including fear, anxiety, sleep disturbance, difficulties at school, and an enduring sense of insecurity. She also describes the strain upon family life, her own grief, fear, and inability to concentrate, and the pain of missing Henry in the ordinary moments of daily life. She says that the family continued to live with the permanent consequences of her death, and I would live with them until they die. Not long after 11 p.m. on the 3rd of December 2025, Henry Nowak was walking back to his university accommodation in Portswood, Southampton, after an evening out. His route took him north along Belmont Road, and he was approaching a junction with St. Denis Road where you lived with your family. Henry was not drunk, but may have been affected a little by the small amount of alcohol he had consumed over the previous few hours. He was not a regular drinker and did not generally drink to excess. His blood alcohol level at the time of his death was below the legal limit for driving. He was alone and unarmed. You happened to be walking south along Belmont Road on the same pavement. It was to be a chance meeting. So, contrary to some reports, Henry was not drunk. His blood alcohol level was below the legal limit for driving, probably less than 2 pints then. Yeah. You were sober, but were carrying a large Sikh dagger in a sheath attached to a belt over the outside of your clothing. It is a strict requirement of the Sikh faith to have a knife called a kirpan at all times. Generally, this will be a small knife hidden from view, often on a length of cord, and worn around the neck. You had that, but in addition, the large dagger in the sheath. You were a member of an order of Sikhs called the Nihang, who have a tradition of having a second knife or kirpan, and that is often fully visible, believing that the guru will look favourably on that. You observe that tradition in your everyday life, at work and in public. Would you feel safe working along someone carrying a 8-inch dagger by your side? I wouldn't like that one little bit. However, it was not a strict requirement. It is borne out by the fact that neither your brother nor father, who arrived on the scene after you had stabbed Henry, was so dressed. According to Professor Gurnam Singh, Professor of Sociology and an expert in the field, quotes, over the last 30 years there has been a trend towards younger people wearing a kirpan with pride in a desire to express their cultural identity. They see it as an act of resistance to being denied the ability otherwise to display their identity. The privilege extended to practicing Sikhs of being allowed to be in public with a bladed article, and particularly in respect of the large dagger, a highly dangerous weapon easily accessible to the wearer, brings with it a huge responsibility. Why is it that our law thinks that because a person is a Sikh, that they are any more responsible than any other citizen of our country? Make it make sense. 12. It is pardon me. 12. It is a fundamental principle of Sikhism that any kirpan is worn as a symbol of religious faith and is never to be carried for an offensive purpose. The legal approach to carrying of such a knife, as long as the blade length does not exceed 9 inches, is that an offence of having a bladed article in a public place will not be prosecuted. Terrible. There has been an acceptance that its possession in those circumstances can amount to a good religious and therefore legal reason for having it. The blade of the knife will not be on display. Either it is under clothing or alternatively in a sheath. For both it is a religious and consequently legal requirement that a kirpan should only be used offensively as a last resort, which would include its use in legal self-defense. In other words, only if use is necessary, and if so reasonable in the circumstances. It is obvious that for use to be reasonable, any perceived threat justifying its use would only be in circumstances of great seriousness and urgency. So a young, fit, fighting-age man is entitled to carry a weapon to defend himself, but our women can't? This law has got to be changed. Restore Britain will change this law. In Belmont Road, you and Henry passed each other. You claimed he deliberately barged into you. I'm sure that was one of the many lies you have told and repeated since it happened. However, there was an interaction between you both. Henry perhaps cheekily made a comment asking if you were a bad man. He was filming you on his phone when he said it. The tone of his voice was not aggressive or threatening, but as it turned out, a tragic error of judgment. It is a reasonable conclusion that the comment was because he had seen the large sheathed dagger. That would have been a very unusual thing for an 18-year-old student and non-Sikh to see. You moved towards him and confidently told him that you were a bad man. This was the response, I believe, of someone who thought they were being disrespected, made worse by the perceived intrusion of being filmed. You were not frightened or concerned, and grabbed his phone, removing it from him. The exact events which immediately followed were only witnessed by Henry and you. However, it would not be unreasonable to conclude that Henry would have wanted his phone back. believing it had been stolen from him, or that he had been robbed. That may have led to a physical struggle between you and him. In that situation, there was every need for self-restraint and control on your part. Who was someone who was born and raised in the UK, that should have been your focus, rather than any distorted view of your religious traditions. Strong words, even a verbal threat, might have been justified, but no more. 15. It will also seem that your turban may have been knocked, pulled, or potentially punched off your head. The wearing of a turban at all times is another fundamental religious requirement of being a male Sikh. The removal of it by another would be considered a serious act and a further mark of disrespect. It is a reasonable conclusion that this would only have added to your anger. 16. You drew the dagger from its sheath, and as the jury was sure, you deliberately stabbed Henry in the chest with it. The knife passed through several layers of clothing, as demonstrated by the multiple slits in his dark top where the material had been overlaid on itself in the struggle, and the single slit in his shirt. It passed upwards through soft tissue between the two uppermost ribs, catching a lung and cutting an important vein behind the collarbone. This was to a depth of 8 centimeters from the skin surface. The consequent bleeding flowed into his chest cavity. The pathologist, Amanda Jeffrey, found 1,200 milliliters, or over 2 pints of blood there. She said that no emergency medical treatment would have permitted access to the bleeding vein. In simple terms, he would not have survived, however quickly he received first aid, CPR, or expert medical treatment. Pause, Paul. 17. You also stabbed him twice in the upper leg at some point, and once again to the lower abdomen groin area at the front. The latter only resulted in a knife tip injury. The former were both substantial depth, although not as deep as the chest wound. Henry's face was also slashed with the blade of the dagger, but I cannot be sure whether that was aimed or intended. However, one or more of the 4 stabs must have had an immediate effect, as Henry was never able to put up his hands to defend himself from serious injury. He was defenseless. 18. You, by contrast, had little if any injury. You told the attending police that you had a small bruise and swelling to your eye from a punch, but it is not obvious on body-worn footage taken then, and there's been no independent evidence given in the trial of any injury at all to you. 19. Your brother Gurpreet arrived on the scene very shortly after your attack had finished. You then filmed Henry desperately trying to get away from you, somehow scaling a fence onto a communal bin before landing on a car in front of the property next door. Bloodstains showed he had got one more or all of his injuries before then. You then showed a callous disregard for his well-being, knowing you had stabbed him to the chest. You continued to make films of Henry's suffering, ignoring much of his desperation at having been stabbed. You told him that had not happened, no doubt to convince others who were nearby. Your attitude did not change, even though Henry was clearly going downhill very fast. Your brother did much the same, although he may just have been accepting that which you had told him rather than lying himself. You lied to him that you had been attacked, picking up on his question about whether it had been accompanied by racism, by falsely claiming that Henry had called you a Paki. I'm sure that Henry had said nothing racist. You were the only person to make that claim, and it is completely at odds with his previous character. Pause, Paul. Sorry guys, my mouth. 21. You joined your brother in relating these lies to the police. By then your mother and father were at the scene. Gurpreet explained that no weapons had been involved or were present. In fact, whilst he was talking to the call operator, you told your mother to take the murder weapon, sheath and belt away, which she did. You did not tell your father what had really happened. Much of the time you just stood by as he at least tried to do something to help Henry. 22. You carried on 22. You carried on telling these wicked lies when police attended on the scene, hampering them in doing their job and effectively obstructing the course of justice. You kept Henry's phone with the incriminating recording of you on it. You had no intention of handing it over. It was found on you after you had been arrested and taken into police custody. Thereafter, 23. Thereafter, the time came when the police needed permission from a court to extend the time for you to be questioned in custody and arrange for you and Gurpreet to be taken there for that purpose. They took the opportunity to record secretly any conversations between the two of you on the journey. Speaking in Punjabi, you agreed to pretend you had acted in self-defense, even though you confessed to stabbing Henry 3 times, including once to the chest with a dagger. You knew you were guilty, demonstrated by your saying to Gurpreet that if there were any cameras in that part of Belmont Road, you would be unable to put forward self-defense. You decided, much as you had at the scene, to try to cover it up. In all your police interviews, in all of your police interviews, you decided not to answer questions about the incident. Instead, you made a written statement on the 7th December 2025, which told more lies. 24. Once the criminal proceedings were underway, you made another statement developing and modifying those lies. It was only when you gave evidence in court that you put forward your full defense. The jury entirely rejected that defense, and I do too. Pause, Paul. 25. In addition to killing Henry and the irreparable harm to those close to him, you have also caused real suffering to others who knew him. You have brought shame upon your family, your community, and your religion. Your actions have stirred up racial tension in Southampton and across the country, which have made many Sikhs worried about their own safety, though they have done absolutely nothing wrong. Yeah, welcome to the world of the white man and the white woman. 26. You bear some responsibility for the offence committed by your mother when you asked her to take the murder weapon away from you after she arrived on the scene. Your lies to the police about what happened led, in part, to the arrest of your father, brother, and mother for murder, and their being taken into police custody. Your mother has remained in custody for the past several months, and so she should. 27. Another consequence of those lies is that the attendant police officers honestly believed that there were reasonable grounds for suspecting Henry had committed an offence, and arrested him, with the consequences he was handcuffed for about a minute before his condition further deteriorated and the arresting officer began CPR. The police were given a convincing but wholly false narrative of the incident. It was dark and Henry was wearing a dark top. The entry damage caused by the knife through it would not have been obvious. Whilst there was visible blood on Henry, it would not have clearly been seen coming from that wound, and the clearly visible facial wound was not life-threatening. Henry was complaining that he had been stabbed and was struggling to breathe, but that would not have necessarily told officers how serious the situation had become. It is the experience of the criminal courts that sometimes someone arrested and handcuffed will feign injury in the hope they may be released. These police officers were faced with having to make a quick decision in pressurized circumstances about the best way to act. The genuine shock to that particular police officer when he realised that he had been given CPR to Henry when he had a serious chest wound tends to show that he was doing his best in a very difficult situation. I'm not going to make any comments on that. I haven't seen the video footage. Yeah. That was page 8 of 10. 28. You were still present at the scene when Henry was saying he was dying, and still you did not tell the truth about how seriously you knew you had hurt him and the need for urgency. Instead, you said he had not been stabbed and that he was exaggerating. 29. The sentence for murder is life imprisonment. You will remain in prison for life unless the parole board decides that it's safe for you to be released on a life license. I must specify a minimum period to be served before the parole board may first consider earlier release. If you are released, it will be on license for the rest of your life and subject to recall to serve the rest of the life sentence. If a time does not come when the parole board is satisfied, it is safe to release you again. You would be liable to such recall if you committed any other offence or just broke any licensing conditions. 30. I have to apply Schedule 21 of the Sentencing Act of 2020 to identify the starting point for the minimum period. In this case, that gives a minimum term is 15 years. The murder did not involve taking a knife to the scene with the purpose to use it to commit an offence, to have it available to do so. It is possible that you had a good legal reason for having the dagger when you met Henry, although considering the jury's verdict, that reason must have come to an end after you removed it from its sheath. Neither was it a murder for gain. Whilst you did take his phone or even rob him of it, that was neither the purpose of the murder nor clearly a part of it. But I am sure it was a further trigger for what happened to Henry. 31. There are a number of aggravating factors to increase the starting point. In no particular order, they are as follows. First, you stabbed Henry 3 other times, then when inflicting the fatal wounds, all with a highly dangerous weapon. Secondly, mental suffering was inflicted on Henry once he lay dying from his injuries by your attitude towards him, of which he would have been aware, and separately, by your lies, which had resulted in a young adult of good character being arrested and handcuffed. Thirdly, there was additional degradation by filming his suffering. Fourth, your repeated and concerted actions after the event included attempts to cover up and to conceal evidence had a tendency to pervert the course of justice. Fifth, you wrongly placed blame on Henry, and your lies also led to an unnecessary arrest for members of your family, which would not have happened if you had told the truth. Sixth, you prevailed upon your mother to assist your attempts to pervert the course of justice. Seventh, Henry was only 18, unarmed and alone, which made him additionally vulnerable. Eighth, the offences had a significant community impact upon others as described and evidenced in press reporting and social media reaction. Ninth, your lies misled the attending police officers, which influenced their decision not only to arrest and handcuff Henry, but also to give subsequent emergency first aid in ignorance of the fact that he had a serious chest wound. Lastly, you abused the privilege extended to Sikhs to have a knife in a public place for religious reasons, dishonoured your religion, and have now put others at risk of repercussions. Those factors increased the minimum term to 23 years. A number of these would not have applied if you had told the police what you said to your brother in the police van on 5th of December 2025. The mitigating factors reduced the minimum period to 21 years. They are your age, your previous good record with no previous convictions, and a lack of premeditation. There are no others. I am sure that you intend to kill in the moments before you stabbed Henry. 33. I must also deduct the period that you've already spent in custody since first appearing in court after charge on the 8th of December 2025. I calculate that to be 175 days before today. 34. Stand up, VICKRUM DIGWA. The sentence on count 1 is life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years and 190 days before there can be any consideration to whether you can be safely released before the end of your life. On count 2, the sentence is 2 years imprisonment concurrent to count 1. 35. If there is a surcharge payable, the order will be drawn up in the appropriate amount. Okay guys, that was the final sentence remarks from the judge. We can go back to the bunker for a second now. Okay, that's it. Disturbing, very disturbing. You know, I think I'll leave it go there. I'm going to do another video about Tommy Robinson defending the Sikhs. And then I'm going to show you information on some of the crimes that the noble Sikhs have carried out in our country. Okay, sorry Henry. You've been listening to Paul Morris, The Green Arrow. Like, share. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. This channel needs to grow. Needs to grow faster. Time is running out. See you on the next one.